Hi, everyone. So I've been just asked to kind of cover this topic about the role of PPIs, the patient representation in the clinical study and trial setting, because I think at the end of the day, the clinical studies need the patient's input. I think we are totally dependent on you to really answer a very important question, and if it chimes with the patients, then that's the only way we are going to be designing good studies and eventually improving the outcomes for all patients. So just giving you some definition, clinical study, it's all about people. That's how it's defined in most of the guidelines. And the question really is that the clinical trials are research studies that test a medicine, a surgery, or a behavioral intervention in people. And I think the important thing is that we are looking at people to answer these questions, without which they will never be answered. And really, the trials are the primary way that we are able to identify if a new form of treatment or prevention, such as a new drug, diet, medical device, is safe. That's the first step we need to kind of overcome. And secondly, importantly, it's effective in people. And really, the clinical trial is designed to learn if a new treatment is more effective or has got less harmful side effects than existing treatments. So that really defines the clinical studies quite nicely. Actually, it covers most of the aspects that we are looking at for our patients. And what is public and patient involvement? This is the definition I've taken from the UK research platform. And it is very succinct in saying that research being carried out with, which is very important, or by members of public, rather than to, about, or for them. So really what you're getting from this is that you need patients to be involved in research. And that is the most important thing, how it's defined. So even the words matter here, that it's not to or about or for them, it's with them. I think that is very, very important. And really active partnership between the patients, the public, and researchers in the research process is vital, actually, to get a successful trial program up and running. Because without that, you're not able to succeed, really. And we have come across this in the past where researchers might think that this is a very important question to answer, but if the patients don't believe in that, the study is not going to go anywhere with that. So really, this is how it is looked at. We look at patients and potential patients. We've got carers there, and some of those patients will become the study participants, and health and social care service users, and then people from organizations which are hopefully trying to accumulate data. And really what we are trying to identify with the whole of that chain is identify what research topics to investigate, and then refine research question and design of the study, and get perspective from the patients and public as well. And that improves the research quality and relevance is very important again, and helps to improve recruitment and retention. So, like I said, if a study is not going to answer the question that majority of us are looking for, then we are not able to recruit into that study. And then eventually you want improve effectiveness of research finding and then implementation of those findings. And finally, this all improves the dissemination of the results, which eventually will be either positive or negative, will be able to disseminate the community. So I'm just going to talk briefly about our experience. We lead most of the UK trials from our center, and my predecessor, Professor Hellman, started the process, but these are the number of trials that we've done for CLL. FLAIR is a phase 3 trial. We've got STATIC, which is another phase 3 trial, and then we had a number of phase 2 studies, which I've just tabulated. But I think all the trials, we have mandatory patient representation in our trial management groups. So whenever we are meeting, we need to have 1 or 2 patients as part of the trial management group. And really in each and every meeting, which happens every 4 to 6 weeks, we disseminate whatever data is there that we need to go through. We need answers from all of our clinicians, but there is effective time for the patient representative. And we are very lucky in UK that we've got a very supportive patient group, and we have got very good representation. And I was just giving an example of one of the studies, static, where we are stopping therapy in patients. And myself and some of my colleagues just said, we're going to do these things. And the patient representatives came back to us and said, no, you're not going to do that because it doesn't matter. And it is wrong for you to do that because you're not going to get the right answer. So essentially, we are wrong sometimes, and we need to accept that. And really, the experience of our patients, especially in the quality of life questionnaires, especially in designing of the study where they think that actually the feedback that they're getting from the whole population is very, very important for us to do the proper studies and get the patient experience there. And really, it's true that we can't do a trial now in UK unless there is a PPI input. So if we don't have a PPI input, the NIHR will not approve funding for that trial. So they will just say, no, you've got no patient representation here. You can't get the money to do the trial. As simple as that. And I think really what we have been able to achieve is that our PPIs have been able to helping us tremendously in running, constructing, and now publicizing the trials on their website as well. So it's safe to say that it goes hand in hand, that partnership that we have got with our patients. And I think I will stop there and I'll get to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Please, now, Johannes, your point of view.
Sure. Thank you very much, Dr. Munir, for your views. And from a patient perspective, I can only say I'm completely excited about the progress that you guys have made in the UK with patient and public involvement in clinical trials and in other research. And I'd like to take the opportunity to give you the patient perspective and the perspective of patient organizations and their views on patient involvement. I will move the public involvement a little bit to the side because I believe there's a couple of other rules that apply there. So we'll primarily focus on the patient role. Why is PPI important from a patient perspective? There's a couple of reasons, and Dr. Munir outlined already some of them, and I'm actually curious on how much our two pitches match, so we will have a conversation in the end, how far we're apart. I don't think we're very far apart, but I still believe the patient perspective is interesting. So we want to improve research relevant, to ensure that the research focuses on issues that matter to patients and, in parentheses, the public. Clinicians are typically focused on getting medical results. Medical results are of huge value for treating patients, obviously, and for drug development, but there's, in terms of patient focus, there's something in addition that matters to patient, which is quality of life, which is the pathway through the treatment, which is how the patient is received, how it's treated as a human, and things like that. The second piece is enhancement of credibility. What do I mean by that? Engaging patients in research projects and in clinical research will enhance the credibility of the outcomes of these research projects, not only for patients, but in the entire public. We've seen in certain countries that clinical research is not possible anymore without patient involvement because government will not give funding. So one of the prerequisites of a trial organization or of a hospital getting funding for clinical research is the involvement of at least one patient or one patient advocate in the research project. And obviously, we're also looking at better research design, and Dr. Munir has outlined it, how patients changed the design of the trial, and I will come up with another 2 examples later on to tell you how patient involvement impacted actually the output of these research projects. Are there standards? Now, if we talk about patient involvement, every patient could go out, obviously, and try to get involved in research projects in various shapes or forms. That can lead to success, but the probability is not very high that it will lead to success, because we need to apply certain measures and certain rules that are standardized, not only to the benefit of the research projects, but also to generate and foster exchange within the patient representative organization. Now, we can only do this if we all speak the same language. Now there are standards, and funnily enough, last Wednesday, I was on a call with the World Health Organization where they presented a new publication called Guidance for Best Practices for Clinical Trials. It's one of these blue books, about 100 pages thick. It's downloadable free of charge. When you get the slides after the meeting, just click that sentence and you will get access to the system. I was excited because I saw from a WHO perspective, patient involvement was all over the place. Not only in clinical trials, but also in basic research projects that are happening in research organizations and in the clinic today. So very, very exciting development, and again, a proof point for the fact that there's value in involving patients. We always learn from our friends in the UK. They're a couple of miles ahead than the rest of the world typically when it comes to patient involvement, and there are UK standards for public involvement. Again, the link to the website is behind that sentence, that covers 6 important values-based areas, as we call it. Inclusive opportunities, which means research projects have to be designed in a way, or should be designed in a way, that allows the opportunity to involve patients. Working together in a partnership is not the patient is here, the professor is up here, but creating some sort of mutual partnership that ensures equal exchange of information and contribution. Support and learning. No patient, and that's very important, is born as a researcher, and no patient should play researchers, because that's not our core competency. We don't understand what the mutations are. We don't understand what proteins are. We don't understand how to do genomical analysis. But what we do understand is the value that we can add from a patient's perspective. We know what we want. We know what we don't want in treatments. We know what quality of life means for us, and it may mean something else for each patient. So that's the value we can add to the research projects, and that's something that clinicians appreciate. Communications is very important. It needs to be open. We want to be told when our contribution doesn't lead to the desired results, because we may want to change course. But we also want to have the opportunity to tell clinicians in communication when we think they're on the wrong path and when we think they need to change focus. Impact is another very important aspect. We want to make impact. We're not doing this for fun. We're doing this for a reason, to improve our own situation, but even more importantly, with the clinical trials and all of that, to improve the situation of future generations of patients. We know that the cancer rates are going up worldwide. We know that more and more people will suffer from cancer, and this makes it even more important that the results of these clinical trials have an impact and make the treatments later on meaningful. Governance is also important, an important area. There are various governance bodies that are responsible for the design and development of research projects. We want to have a say. It's happening in some countries, not in all countries yet. We understand it's a process that needs to be started, and unless we don't engage in this project, in this process, we can't really contribute. What are the needs of patients in this context? I mentioned training already. We should demand training from the clinicians. And to my experience, they're really happy to explain to us what the core of these clinical trials are we should engage, and what we need to understand in terms of what it's all about. Now, I have an own personal philosophy. I will never be able to understand the medical context, and I don't need to. But what I should be able to understand is what the structure of a clinical trial is, how it works, why it has different arms, intervention arm, comparison arm, what are the inclusion-exclusion criteria, and some of the methodologies. That's easy to learn, and I'm sure our friends and partners in the clinic are more than willing to educate us on that. Open communication, I don't have to go into that. Influencing decisions is a very important point. Sometimes patient involvement comes very, very late in the clinical trial. So before the researcher sort of sends the trial proposal out to the funding body, they suddenly realize, oh, there's a need for a patient voice. So they prepare some sort of document and go to the patient and say, this is my trial, can you sign here? Otherwise, I don't get funding. This is what we don't want. We want to be involved early on and be able, ideally, to influence the trial design and the decisions that are taken throughout the trial development, because this makes sense to have patient involvement very early on. And we want acceptance. We want to be accepted as an equal partner in the research project, because only then we're in a position to contribute as much as we can in an open fashion. What are the levels of PPI engagements? There's obviously various levels. One is informing, providing information to patients and the public about research. I think this is this is a very important aspect, and this is typically underestimated by the clinical community. What we can do as patients, we have a voice. We're organized in patient advocacy groups, and we're talking to the public, we're talking to the caregivers, we're talking sometimes to the press, we're talking to all sort of associations and bodies. If we believe in something, we can articulate that this something we believe in is good for society and good for the patients. And the clinical society can actually use this as a nice marketing instrument. And typically, it works. Consulting. We want to be able to give feedback on the research plans or on the results. Do these curves, do we understand them? Do they make sense that we've seen the last couple of days? Is there a big difference in terms of outcome for the various treatments and things like that? And we want to collaborate and co-produce. I've even seen patient organizations. The US is one example, and Brian, if he's here in the room, he will probably agree with me. They are doing their own research projects and they fund their own research projects, which is really, really a good thing and puts the power of patients that I mentioned yesterday at a totally different level. Roles of patient and public, advisors, co-researchers, participants in governance, that's a repetition. I already spoke about this and don't want to go into the details in order to save a little bit of time. What are the benefits of PPI in research that we believe they are for the clinical community and the patients that will benefit from the results? Patient-centered outcomes. We've been talking in the first session today about the fact that in these clinical trials that have been run at MD Anderson and elsewhere, there wasn't really a good overview about quality of life. Why was that? because the quality of life questionnaires have probably not been disseminated in a way that would be good for the patients, and although also the questions have probably not been designed in such a way that they give meaningful information back to the clinician. So that's an area where we'll definitely be able to contribute and make a difference. Improved recruitment and retentions. Whenever I talk to clinicians, many of them have a problem filling their trials. So there's not enough patients that want to participate in the trials. Patients that are involved in these trials can make a real difference because they combine it with their outreach to their patient organizations and say, hey, did you know that there's a new clinical trial that actually considers your condition, that you have your genetic profile and the stage you're actually at? And this is a way where the patient community can actually shovel patients into the clinical trials and fill them much earlier and much quicker, so that the trial itself leads to much earlier results. Cultural sensitivity is also an important aspect. We've spoken about the difference in terms of gender, receiving medications. Men have typically less side effects than women. That has certain reasons. So we need to make sure that gender is considered equally within clinical trials and research projects, and so on and so forth. What are the challenges? There are challenges. Nothing positive doesn't come at zero cost. Challenge number one is time and resources, especially in the beginning of a research project. Involvement can be very, very time consuming for patients, and they need to be aware of that. So that brings me back to the open communication. We want the clinicians to tell us what their expectation is in terms of time involvement, so that we can plan for it. Training needs. I briefly mentioned this already. We need to be trained up because we're not born as researchers. We were not educated. And I guess, again, the clinicians are more than happy to do that. Tokenism, I talked about it. What we don't want is sign a letter of approval or a letter of intent or letter of support. That's far too late in the game. Involvement needs to come early on. Two examples I have for you of successful patient involvement. One basic research project from the German Cancer Research Center in Heidelberg. There's a research proposal talking about bacterial impacts on colorectal cancer phenotypes and therapies using patient-derived organoids. So they take cells out of your colon and they sort of make them grow and do experiments with it. Initially, the team has not thought to require patient involvement in that project. In basic research, it doesn't happen very often where patient voice makes a difference. But we sat together as a team, and the conversation was about not actually that very research project, but what happens afterwards. So we got a patient involved, and the outcome for the project was we can actually right away start designing a follow-on project that takes the results from the first one and gets it into clinical practice. And we also have a chance to change colorectal cancer screening in terms of stratifying the patients. What do I mean by stratifying the patients? If the output of a microbiome analysis says, for example, that patient is very unlikely to ever get colorectal cancer, then there's no colonoscopy required immediately. Right? A blood test with looking for DNA may be sufficient. But if there's a high risk for that patient, depending on the outcome of the test, we may stratify certain patient groups right into colorectal cancer screening with the objective to getting results very early on and potentially treat the patients in a much better way. Second research project was a clinical trial. Not a it was somewhat a medical one, but not something which talks about therapies. It was a pilot randomized phase 2 trial on social prescriptions and microlearning to improve care for cancer patients and their caregivers. So the idea was to approach patients that are under treatment with learning bits and pieces to make sure they feel better, their quality of life improves, they have a much better handle on their nutrition, on their exercise of their body and things like that. So initially the clinical team wanted to design the whole shebang, and the questions we asked were twofold. One, what about the learning pieces? Have you involved patients in the design of the app and in the user acceptance testing? The answer was no, we haven't thought about that. So our proposal, why don't you give it a try? I think we as patients know best how we would like to have an app designed and how the usability is better. And the second question was about the learning content. So our question was, who's designing the learning content? Who's actually developing the bits and pieces that gets presented well? The answer was we contracted an agency. I said, do you think that's the best solution? So the answer was, no, not really. Why don't you involve patients in the design? Because they know probably best how they would react to certain content pieces and change their behavior. So make the content patient-centric and make the app patient-centric. That led to funding for the clinical trial and led to the fact that it's been announced and the patients that have enrolled so far are really happy with what they got. How to involve patients? I know I'm out of time. I think we can discuss these topics during the panel discussion. And the conclusion, just some takeaways. PPI makes research more relevant. Engaging patients in the public can shape better outcomes. And researchers should see PPI not as a one-time event, but as an ongoing partnership with developing a relationship. Thank you very much.
Thank you to you.